So let's look at page 53 through 54, numbers 19 through 14 all. Let's work on those together. Okay, so when I'm given a graph, I'm just going to tell you right now, the best method to use is going to be the rise over run method. That's this blue method that we were talking about before, where you just count it out and figure out the slope that way. You don't have to use the formula method for every single problem. In fact, there's some problems where it's just going to be easier to visually look and see what's going on. So when you have a graph, I like to use the rise over run method. So I'm going to track this, and you can do this with your finger on the book. You can just kind of point and count. That's totally fine. I'm going to actually draw it out here, and I'm going to count out 1, 2, 3, and now I'm at the same vertical distance as this next number. So I went, if I'm keeping track of my rise, I went down, so down is a negative direction, down 3 steps, okay? Now I'm going to keep track of my run. So now I'm going over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now I went to the right 5, and the way that we note that in math is if I went to the right 5, that means that I went positive direction, because going to the right is a positive direction, 5 steps, okay? If you have trouble trying to remember which one's which, left or right, which one's negative, which one's positive, think about a number line. If you have a number line, your negative numbers are always on the left and your positive numbers are always on the right, okay? So that's the best way to keep track of which one's negative, which one's positive. So if I'm writing out my slope here, my slope is going to be rise over run. So my slope ends up being -3 over +5, giving me -3/5 as my answer here. Now I'm not going to write this all out for every problem. In fact, I'll just kind of go through the answers a little bit more quickly for these next 3. Okay, looking at 10, I'm going to keep track, so I'm going to go from this point to this point. I'm going up first, so I'm going to go and meet it to where it is vertically, and I just go 1 step, okay? And then I go to the right 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps, okay? So if I'm going up 1 and over 6, this is my rise, this is my run. My slope here is rise 1 over 6 run. That was kind of confusing to say. That rhymed, it kind of threw my brain off. So the slope ends up being 1/6. It's important to remember which one goes first. Rise goes first, goes on top, and then run goes second, okay? So we get 1/6. All right, let's look at this one. Now, using the rise over run method might be a little confusing, because if I'm starting at this point, I don't have anywhere to go. I can't go up or down. I have to stay put. So if I don't go any distance, that means I rose 0 steps. In other words, the top number, doesn't matter what the bottom number is at all, we end up with the situation where we have 0 over whatever our other number is. We're not even going to worry about what it is, because 0 over anything is just 0. So my slope for this one is 0. Another thing you can notice is that this fits, and this is why we wrote these down earlier, this fits this third graph right here. We have a line that is horizontal. Perfectly horizontal means our slope is 0, okay? If you can recognize that, it saves you a lot of time. Now let's look at 12. 12, we get kind of an opposite situation. Here we have a vertical graph. So if it's perfectly vertical, we know that we're getting some number over 0, right? Our rise, we can actually count it this time. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're actually getting, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and scratch this out, because we can actually give a number here, which is 5. So I go up 5, but then I'm already at the point, so I don't need to go anywhere. So now I'm 5 over 0. But we know that 5 over 0 is not possible, right? And so since this isn't possible, we would just write this as defined because it is impossible to divide by a 0. Okay? All right, that's number 12. Let's go ahead and move on to number 13. Now here's where we have to actually do some math, right? Before we were just counting, now we're actually going to do some math. So here, to start this problem, I need to actually label these. Pick which one's going to be your set number 1, which one's going to be number 2. To keep it easy, I'm just going to label these set number 1 as my first point, right? So I need x1, y1. And then my second set is the second set of points, which is x2, y2. Okay? And now I plug it into my formula. Slope equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Okay? So let's go ahead and plug those in. y2 is -1. Okay? Minus, I'm always going to put this minus here, right? No matter what the sign looks like. I'm not even looking at the numbers. I'm just putting the minus no matter what. Okay? So minus y1, which is -1. So now I've got a -1 here. Okay? If you don't keep track of that, if you don't keep track that you should be putting a minus no matter what, and then put the negative, you're going to mess this problem up. You're going to end up just subtracting 1. And that's not what you're doing here. So -2 minus 4. Okay? And that equals -1 plus 1 over -2 minus 4. -1 plus 1 cancels each other out, so I end up with 0 over -6, which means my slope is just 0. Okay? Remember, it's important to identify where's the 0. The 0 is on top. We can divide numbers into 0, right? I can say the phrase, how many 6s does it take to get to 0? Well, none. So 0 would be the answer. 0 6s gives me the answer, okay? All right. Slope for this one is going to be x1, y1, x2, y2. So my y2 minus my x1, or sorry, not x1, minus my y1, x2 minus my x1. This is 8 plus 3 all over 5 minus 5, which is 0. So now I've got 11 over 0. But is that possible? No, you can't divide by 0. So my answer here is undefined. Okay? And that's number 14. All right, we're going to look at one more piece of note, which is how to find the slope when all you're given is a table. Okay? So for now, I'm going to go ahead and block out this right here so we can just look at this whole problem. In fact, let's just look at the table to start. Okay? So let's say you were given a table that looks like this, where you've got the x values and the y values. Your goal here is to pick any 2 points on the table. And yes, you can pick literally any 2 points you want. You can pick 1 and 8, 7 and 4. You can pick 1 and 8, 4 and 6. You could pick 4 and 6, 7 and 4, 7 and 4, 10 and 2. Whatever 2 you choose, you just need to make sure you circle them or something, or keep track of them somehow. And then you need to decide which one's going to be your first point, which one's going to be your second point. And here I've labeled them set 1, set 2. Okay? Ignore this. This isn't supposed to be green. This is actually supposed to be blue, if you're keeping track. Okay? So notice that your blue set is going to be the first number in the fraction, okay, in your formula. And then the second set, your yellow, is going to be the second number, okay? So let's go ahead and plug these in. Notice I've labeled all these. My x1 now is whatever's in the x values, and it's in my first set, right? x2 is in the x values, whatever's in my second set, okay? So I've labeled all these here. And then you plug them into the formula, and you should get 2 minus 6 equals -4. 10 minus 4 equals 6. Simplify this down to -2 over 3. And that's how you solve these using a table. So I want you to go ahead and do page 54, numbers 21 and 23. So you go ahead and do that. I'll let you pause and then come back and we'll work through the answers pretty quickly. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to pick any two values. I'm just going to pick the easiest numbers I can see on the graph here, or on the table here. The first set of numbers looks pretty easy, and I'll just go with the second set of numbers. That way I don't have to do any simplifying, okay? So I'm going to pick this as my set number 1, set number 2. So when I'm solving this, slope is equal to my y2. So this is my second set, so this is my y2, 10, minus my y1 in my first set, okay? x2 in my second set minus x1 in my first set. And now let's solve. 8 over 2, and 8 over 2 makes 4. So that's the answer for 21. Okay, let's do number 23. Number 23, I'm going to pick this 2 right here because I like dealing with positive numbers, and I'll just pick the numbers next to it, okay? So I'll let this be my set number 1, my set number 2, okay? Set number 1, set number 2. I'm going to label it this time so we can keep track. So my slope is equal to y2, so this is my y2, negative 1, minus y1, which is 2, over x2, which is 6, minus x1, which is 2. Solve this, negative 3 over 4. And there's no way to simplify that any further. That's the answer. All right, that's 1.2.